Hello everyone, welcome. Today is the 6th of September 2023 and I'm going to talk about something different, and I hope you will stay with me for I feel it's going to be a little bit long. I try to always look, this is what I'm doing. I'm reading and I'm watching a lot of conversations from different countries, and in order to bring to you a summary of what they are saying on different political and social and cultural issues and so on, I'm watching quite a few of them, and then my challenge is to have to summarize it all, hopefully in half an hour, but I usually go on for about an hour, and I can't help it. I can't summarize all that in one video, but I think that if you stay with me today, I hope it won't be more than an hour. I will not offer you solutions of anything, I never do, but just for you to ponder about these issues and perhaps to come to just consider other possibilities. And in the last video I brought to you a summary of more than one French thinkers, philosophers, and I don't think they're activists, but they're authors, I suppose. And today I'm going to introduce to you, I have been watching many videos of him, and I'll summarize it. I'm following his essay, as it were, but I have watched, like, I don't know, 4 talks, some of them 1 hour, 2 hours long. And I'm going to follow his essays. His name is Cesar Vidal, Dr. Vidal. And he's a very famous and well-known Spanish writer, and when I was in Spain in the 2000s, I used to listen to him. He had a radio program of about 4 hours long daily. He's a philosopher, he's mainly a historian, but he's a person of great learning, and I believe he's now in, I don't know whether he's in Latin America or in Florida, but he does a lot of talks throughout Latin America, and I think he's well respected as a thinker. And I found many of his videos giving conferences in Spain and Latin America, and talking about the so-called Globalist Agenda. And he exposes, he has a certain way of addressing these problems, and it's as a very experienced radio program personality, he has a very good way of summarizing sometimes highly complex thoughts. So I'm going to follow his summary, although the best summary I found of all his thoughts on this topic is a very old one. It's about, I would say, 8 years old. So the information is rather, outdated, because not the approach that he has or the understanding that he has, but for example, this is before the global illness. This is before the new gender ideology, sort of what came afterwards with, what is happening to the children and all these issues that we have to deal with nowadays. So this is well before that. So I'm actually having to update a lot, but I'm going to follow him to a great extent, how he deals with this and this and this and this. When I quote him, of course, I will tell you, but and I will put his reference down below in case you want to watch those videos. So let me start with then the globalist agenda. And he holds that without any, because he's going to give reasons, he's going to give data, he's going to give you references and so on, but he feels it is a destruction of the nation state, the family, and Christianity. There are these three pillars that have to be moved or changed in order for a global agenda to succeed, and so. Instead of Christianity, I thought that perhaps religion, but then when I thought about it, I thought no, because religion is a very wide term, and what one means by religion, spirituality, it's easy to change from one god to another, or from one religion out of the ashes of one to create another, and so on. So I think the point that he makes is a good one, Christianity. So I'm going to devote this I'm going to divide it into two videos, because today I'm going to talk about the family, and within, or the destruction of the family unit, and that how the gender ideology and all these movements are actually part of, towards going to that goal, and part of it. Okay, and I will deal with the destruction of the erosion of the nation state and with Christianity, hopefully tomorrow, because I still have a lot of work to do on this. So let's start. First of all, of course, I don't need to tell you this, that there is a difference between globalization and globalism. Okay, globalization is what we normally just say, well, you know, this is what is happening now, technology and so on. So someone in Latin America sells cocoa to the United States, whatever. That is not what we are talking about. Okay, we are talking about something else. We're talking about a supranational, so let's say world, or let's say globalist in that sense, agenda, which is an attempt to control the entire planet by a small group that no one has elected, no one has appointed, no one has delegated to anything. Now, I know that immediately some of you are going to say, oh, we've heard all about those conspiracy theories. Well, stay with me. In order to confuse many, not you perhaps, but many, globalization, the term globalization will be brought in to say, as I said, but we live in a globalized world, blah, blah. No. Conspiracy theory or not, whatever you think of this, we know about, we cannot deny it, we know about an organization, a body called the World Economic Forum. We have heard of the Great Reset, we have heard about the Agenda 2030, etc., etc. You've heard of those, okay. You might not have heard, however, or read a book written by David Rockefeller, his memoirs, published in 2002. So let me read you an excerpt when he's talking about the role of the globalist agenda, or as he called it then, an internationalist's agenda, and these supranational organizations. And he says explicitly in his memoirs, and I quote, "Some believe that we, the Rockefeller family he's referring to, are part of a secret cabal that works against the best interests of the United States and characterize my family and me as internationalists and as people who conspire with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that is the accusation, I plead guilty, and I am proud of it. End of quote. And then he goes on to talk about the Bilderberg Club, the International Affairs Commission, the many other organizations. And he's talking very specifically about supranational entities with a very specific agenda of global dominance. And he's not retracting from it. He's saying, yes, and I'm proud of doing this. I plead guilty, he says, in black and white. And this global dominance, which also seeks to put an end, little by little, to any obstacle that could hinder the goals and objectives of what he himself calls a secret cabal. He says that himself, and admits that if that is what they or the family of this cabal is being accused of, then he says, I am guilty and I'm proud of it. And one does not identify itself with one agenda that does not identify itself with any particular country of origin. That is, it has supranational goals and objectives, and that seeks to create one single structure in the world. That is, and he says it, a political, social, and economic. And this agenda, this goal, is going to come up against many obstacles, of course. But we can summarize it, this is Dr. Vidal summarizing it into three main ones. Obstacle number one, the nation state. Obstacle number two, the family. And obstacle number three, Christianity. All right, so today, therefore, I will deal only with one of these obstacles, the one of the family, and why it is an obstacle for the globalist agenda. That it exists, I have no doubt. So, against the family, how the family as a unit has been attacked and is being attacked, here we will have to bring in the current gender ideology, so-called, because eventually this is what the gender ideology is attacking. And it all leads to the family. Why the family? Mainly for two reasons. People are born into a family. The family, unlike banks or national governments or city councils, is a natural institution. What does that mean, a natural institution? Throughout the history of humanity, we have known periods when there were no banks, when there were no governments, no parliaments, no republics. Those are human creations to better organize ourselves in society, to defend ourselves from other tribes, whatever it might be, and which have appeared throughout history and have, or created by us, and have given us sometimes better, sometimes worse results. But we have not known a moment in the history of mankind when there was not the family. The ones you love, the ones that you want to protect, your own blood, as it were, to put it somewhat dramatically. It is a totally natural instinct and a natural institution. The union of a man and a woman whose union brings about new life, your children. All right. Now, because it is natural in this sense, it is a rather annoying obstacle, and it has always been. Whenever you try to create an ideal society, you're going to go against the family, because this is the one always annoying you, putting a tremendous barrier to that ideal life. The communists tried it, the fascists tried it, everywhere. Everyone who has tried to impose a structure from above has always seen the family as an adversary. And so it is also with this new globalist supranational, above national structure. And it is annoying precisely because it has a capacity to resist, to endure, looking after your own that other institutions do not have. For example, if the stock market crashes, the economy crashes, and we are all in a hole. Yes, and if a revolution occurs in your country, the institutions will collapse. And if there is a civil war or a foreign invasion, the state apparatus suffers and it may collapse completely. Yes, and at this moment, when everything around you is in ruins, where do you look to? The family might well is the only institution standing at the end of it all. The family is our last refuge, if you will. And whether you are on the left, the right, the middle, you believe in God, you do not believe in God, the family is the last refuge. And of course I am aware, as you are, I'm not ignoring that the family is not a perfect institution, obviously. There are non-functional families, as they are called, and there is failure in the family. And of course, many people suffer within the family. Of course, I am aware of that. I also know that plane crashes, and soon I'll be boarding one to visit my beautiful daughters. My eldest daughter even paid for my trip. But since they want to create a world where the nation state no longer has any real power or sovereignty, as I said, I will deal with this topic in the next video. Since they want to create a world where the individual is alone, so that no longer has the means to, as it were, fight back and can therefore be easily dominated or controlled or manipulated alone, obviously they have to destroy and do away with that last refuge, the family, the institution where even the worst of people at a certain moment can find some support or help. When the nation state disappears, the only trench left standing that remains is the family. Let me tell you about a very interesting interview which is on YouTube. It's an interview in which Aaron Russo, I don't know whether you've heard of him, an American filmmaker. He died in about 2017. He's a Jewish American, a filmmaker, a political activist, won many awards. The films Trading Places, Wise Guys, The Rose. Anyway, he comments in one interview on how he had many friendships with the Rockefeller family, previously mentioned. And one day, one of the members of this family, talking to him, tells him that the women's liberation movement of the 1960s was actually encouraged, boosted, prompted, promoted by them and financed. They promoted and financed all the feminist women magazines. And Aaron Russo, who thought, like the rest of us, that the women's liberation movement and the feminist movement afterwards, that was in fact to defend women, women's rights and equal opportunities and equal pay, etc., etc., okay? So Russo asked him, what interest really can the Rockefeller family have in supporting feminism? What is the connection there? And he said, oh, that's easy. Literally, the quote, if you take the woman out of the home, the family won't survive, would not be able to support itself. Education, socialization will now pass on to the state. And on top of that, he added, they're going to pay more taxes. Yes, there is a redistribution of roles, and sure, the family will have more assets, more money, 2 salaries at the time. At the time, women could actually still see the benefit of the 2-wage family. I remember it in the 60s and 70s. You actually had an extra salary, and that meant that you could buy more things, more extras. Eventually, it would no longer be the case. It actually came to a point where you have to have 2 salaries. You cannot survive otherwise. So no longer a matter of choice. So at that time, in any case, families had more income. What is evident is that the effect that he had eventually on the family was in many ways catastrophic. Never, ever, ever was a society in the world that will be able to thank mothers enough for the role that they have always played in the education and socialization of children. And no society in the world will realize properly, therefore, the money also, if you want to talk about money, the money that was saved in just a few instances, jails, police, judges, to name a few, due to the role that mothers had in looking after their own children. In this context, the destruction of the family is of extreme importance, because now the state will educate and socialize your children, not the parents. The state will educate them how in the values that they want, and of course no one will have a place to look towards in the midst of a dictatorship. You will have no place left where to seek shelter if the family is destroyed. The destruction of the family at the moment, of the family unit, is real. We can all see it. The influence on the women's movement in the 60s and the feminist movement later, the feminist movement took over. And now we are seeing the destruction of the family phase 3, as it were. A gender ideology in its many aspects. You can talk about woke and trans, whatever it is today. Okay. So let me then look at this as gender ideology as a tool, a further tool for the destruction, working towards the destruction of the family. First, if someone thinks that behind gender ideology there is just a desire to be fair and to recognize the rights of homosexual people and in other forms, in all its varieties, for example, I shall have to praise your absolute innocence and your immense naivete, because you are nowhere near what is going on, what is happening in our culture. More. First, the homosexual community, despite greatly inflating its numbers, which it does, the members in any given country, the actual real numbers are quite small. I know that in the last 4 years they have increased tremendously in, bisexuality and other forms and so on. But it's still, when you look at the whole population, it is still relatively small. In a study done in the United States about, I think it was 10 years ago, they identified, I find this hard to believe, but they identified, before it became kind of fashionable, if you will, they identified only 1% of the population in males and 0.5% in females. I know that this is very antiquated and outdated. It will be much more now. But in any case, we are here talking in social and political terms about a minority which would be almost insignificant. There are more people who are obese or bald. All right. Now, a mistake made is in political terms, it's to see this as the left and the right, to continue talking about the left and the right in the political spectrum. I don't believe that falls in either of those categories. Nor is it my belief that this new ideology comes, as many political theories believe, from the neo-Marxist of the Frankfurt School, changing the proletariat for individual groups and identities. What many socialists and communists after the Second World War from Germany and Austria and so on, they who were Marxists and communists came to the United States, but mainly they are identified with Berkeley in California. And the theory goes that since they saw that communism, Marxism hadn't worked really, they were aware of the problems of the Soviet Union and so on. But they still believed in the theory, in the Marxist theory of history. What that was that the history of the world has always been divided according to power in terms of the haves and the have-nots. Throughout history, said Marx, there has always been the individuals above who have the power and those below who don't have it. And so you have the slave and the owner, and then you have the serf and the lord. And then with capitalism, he said, we have the proletariat, the working class, and the owners of the means of production and so on. Okay? But he said, this has always happened. And the solution was, to him very clearly, that if those at the very bottom, the powerless, came to the top, then that would be practically the end of history, because there was no one else there to exploit. Okay, so once you have the exploitees right at the very bottom taking power, then that would be then the end of this exploitation of humankind. Okay, that was his theory. Now, what this would be, I won't go into Fukuyama. No, all right. He did a sort of a similar thing about when the collapse of the Soviet Union, about liberalism. Okay, but let's not go into that at the moment. So, what these Marxists from Central Europe said was, we still believe that this theory is good, that this theory is valid. It just kind of hasn't worked in the Soviet Union and later in China, but it is correct. This is the right way to look at history, they said. And so they said, okay, how about if we apply this ideology in a different way? Okay, so instead of looking at it as from economic terms, social class, the working class and the ruling class, they said, forget about that, forget the economics. How about looking at it, the division of society according to other things? So then they devised this system of, okay, no longer working class, ruling class, but we have men, a chunk, women, another chunk, white, black, homosexual, heterosexual, okay? So instead of having, when you took a little piece of society, let's say a cake, when you get a piece of cake, you get the crust and you get the jam and you get the cream. That was the original economic view. But now what you have is a sort of a pizza, one slice and one slice and one slice and so on. Okay? This is the theory that still many political thinkers think that is what has happened. And so they view this gender ideology thing as the left, because it has, as they see it, it's based on neo-Marxism. My point is that they're wrong. When it comes, and perhaps it would be a very good idea to stop thinking about the right and the left in this political spectrum. Perhaps it has always been a vertical one, those at the top and those at the bottom. I say that it's not just the left that is pursuing this ideology. It's because when it comes to gender ideology, the right is always there too. They have assumed it, they have received it, and they acknowledge it. What is driving gender ideology, in fact, are, like the Rockefellers with the feminist movement I expressed earlier. Rockefeller was not a communist, okay? What is happening here is that there is a supranational, above the nation state, about the nation state power, and this power is well above political parties. Political parties are now nothing more than the instruments, the tools, when it comes to promoting a gender ideology in any one country. But the agenda itself is far above them, and it is a globalist agenda of world power, of world domination. Let me give you a few facts before getting into the objectives of that globalist agenda. According to the Wall Street Journal a few years ago, you may read it, you may not read it, agree with it or not agree with it, but it's not really a madman's webpage, where you read about reptilians ruling the world or something like that. Okay, so in 2017, it reported Soros had donated $18,000 million to open society objectives. 18,000 million to open society objectives. Just an aside very quickly. I mentioned this in another video, but Soros is a peculiar character. He is a Jewish man born in Hungary, now has American citizenship. When he was a young man, he helped the Nazis to deport other Jews into the chambers, the gas chambers of Auschwitz. This is not a slander because Soros himself, he may not be simpatico to many, but he himself said in an interview on YouTube, you can see it there, when he was asked, "Is it true that you collaborated with the Nazis to deport Jews to the gas chambers?" That was the question. And Soros says, and you can watch it, Soros says, with impressive calmness and with smile worthy of the Mona Lisa, he says, yes. And there is a pause there, naturally, because the interviewer is taken aback a little bit. She had expected him to say, oh, that's absolute nonsense, slander, envy from people who are enemies of freedom, and so on and so forth, right? But no, he says, yes, and then continues, it is true, and I quote, "It is true, and if I hadn't done it, someone else would have. If I hadn't done it, someone else would have done so." Which is an amazing argument. One expects, I'm guilty because I didn't do anything about to stop it, but I was a teenager and I couldn't, and so if I didn't stop someone from doing it, well, but not me, something like that. So let us talk about Soros and his power to promote gender ideology in its many forms. Remember, all this has an objective. So gender ideology is a means towards the end of the destruction of the family. And now, we know that today. Okay, first of all, his power. On the ground, actual, in politics, in governments. Just one example. And it's not the most obvious one. That is why, because you can think of many, but just to give you one, I think Dr. Vidal gives this example. About 7 or 8 years ago, he had a radio program, that is Dr. Vidal, whom I'm following here, a program in Spain called The Voice, a political thing for about 4 hours. And where he, in this particular program, he was going to give the actual names of the European Union MPs, the deputies, the representatives, okay, to give the name of the politicians that Soros considered, quote, reliable, therefore worthy of support. The word was reliable. And Dr. Vidal had an entire internal document in its entirety. And he saw that 1/3 at the time, this is almost 10 years ago, at the time, 1/3 were reliable. Imagine now. But even then, that was more than just one political party. They came from both parties, and the amount of deputies, of MPs, were larger than any one political party. So, from the whole spectrum, from the left and from the right, 2 main reasons to be reliable. There were many, but 2 main ones. to get his support, people would have to support gender ideology, and people would have to be in favor of opening the doors of each country to the entry of others, and he specifies Muslims, the entry of Muslims into Europe. This was the European thing. In America, it might be something else. Not necessarily Muslims, perhaps someone else. But in Europe, it was that. Now, the gender ideology is also supported by Freemasonry. Dr. Vidal has written quite a lot about this. He has actually a book, I read it many, many years ago. But he says, if anyone is curious enough, says Dr. Vidal, to read the White Book on Civility. Civility is probably an erroneous translation of the word. It's more like civilization or perhaps even citizenship. But in any case, this White Book of the French Grand Orient, you will find that among the goals, apart from the classical ones of liberté, égalité, fraternité, there was a fourth one, don't forget, down with the clergy, but that was dropped. Apart from these three ones, gender ideology is there nowadays. It is rather surprising because in addition to some of these statements and all these formulations, we have also a sense of depopulation, control of the population, and so on, and it's all sort of interacted. Let me go here. Let me hold on a second. I have to. Yeah. Okay. So allow me to give you. I'm going to read here from some notes. Allow me to give you some data so that you realize what is going on in the depopulation thing. Let me move from gender ideology, I'll come back to that, to what the abortion and the abortion laws have meant. Now, I'm going to talk about abortion, but I'm going to because this is also something against within the family. Okay, I'm going to talk about abortion, but I hope you stay because I'm not going to talk about it in the normal way. In other words, in the abortion debate, we have the free choice. Yes, I have a right to my body and so on. And then you have the pro-life, and that is usually from a moral standpoint, but that is wrong kind of thing. And I'm going to avoid the moral side of it, difficult as it is, because I am a traditional Catholic, and I find it hard to disconnect it. But I'm going to try to talk about it in just empirical terms, about how this abortion thing has actually changed society and its objectives. Okay, since the year in the US, since the year that Roe versus Wade, you remember, 1973 was approved by the Supreme Court, that allowed the practice of abortion in the United States, 60 million babies were, choose your word. Of those 60 million babies, please listen, African Americans, Black Americans, I don't know what to call you anymore, Americans from Caribbean descent. I don't. Black Americans, yes, as opposed to white or whatever. Okay. Of those 60 million, 18 million were black children in the US. Okay. So 18 million black babies. I don't know what the percentage of the population, the African American population is in the United States. Is it safe to say between 12, 14, something like that percent? 18 million more would have meant you would be, what, in the late 20s, 20% to 20 many percent? I'm not sure, I'm not, I haven't stopped to work it out. But so when we saw, for example, a movement like Black Lives Matter taken to the streets because a police officer had killed a black man, and they may be right to take to the streets, that's not my point. But my point is, I wonder what type of Black Lives Matter in the US. So 18 million black babies. This is of no small importance. It is given little importance because it is seen as I said, as a sort of a moral issue, and if you're not with that, then you concentrate on the I have a right to. Okay. Now, let me give you some more numbers. This planet of ours, in which we live, has aborted more than 1,400 billion babies. Billion with a B. 1,400 billion babies. My friends, this is the number of the Chinese population at the moment, perhaps even a little higher. And of course, with the, let's say, elimination of 1,400 billion beings, if you have an agenda of depopulation, you're probably quite satisfied with these figures. I understand some who would argue. My point is look, you might say very well, you don't want to, perhaps you're uncomfortable looking at the numbers and so on, but you say, but no, there are too many people in the planet, and I think we should, you don't want to go into great details about how to make the sausage, but you say, but there are too many people in the world. I understand what you're saying. Consider this, okay, because there is a further objective here, okay. The laws are being increasingly laxed on this, okay, and more tolerant. In the United States, in New York State, a few years back, a policy was approved that until you could actually have an abortion until the very last moment, when actually the baby comes out of the woman's womb. Okay, so if I can say something personal here, is a sort of converting a sacred tabernacle into a torture chamber. A woman's womb is not a torture chamber, but anyway, I thought that I wouldn't talk about it from a moral standpoint. But anyway, so the hope is very much to extend this to Latin America. There we can see that a lot is happening there to promote this. I don't know in California whether a law was passed that you could even kill the baby after it was born. I don't know when they would put the line as to when he couldn't. I don't know that that was passed or not, but there was certainly talk about making that legal. But this is being promoted very much in Latin America and in Africa and all over the world. Reduce the population. Reduce the population down to a level that is acceptable to us, those who control the world. Do you remember a story? Do you remember there was a film made about it, the story of Dr. Gosnell? There was a trial in America, and he might have been the biggest serial killer in the United States. It was a film in 2008. Dr. Gosnell was 2018, I think. Dr. Gosnell was he was a doctor, and he was an abortion provider, and who practiced abortions. And at one point, he had the bad luck that one of the patients he treated died. And an investigation began, and they discovered that Dr. Gosnell did not actually apply the law, did not respect the, at the time, 24-week maximum period of pregnancy to practice an abortion. But that, he did it at any time during pregnancy. Not only that, but he had started using some abortion measures that were truly chilling. For example, sometimes when the baby that he had aborted or tried to abort would come out alive, nevertheless, very late in the pregnancy, despite the abortion, the baby would be alive. Dr. Gosnell, with complete calmness, he would take a pair of scissors and cut the spinal cord, the spinal cord column, just below the base of the skull. And that was when it had to be done, the baby was, I'm reading my notes here, beyond the 24 weeks. And so because of that, and because of this investigation of the woman who had died, two very brave police officers with great difficulty managed to convince the prosecutor that it was not a question of abortion. They were not interested in, saying that a woman does not have the right to an abortion. They didn't want to make it an issue about abortion. They were trying to say, look, the law here has been broken, and really a homicide has been committed. Okay, a homicide had occurred in accordance with the state law at the time, and therefore Dr. Gosnell was prosecuted, and Dr. Gosnell was not at all worried. He was actually quite proud of what he had done, and he went to trial convinced that he would be acquitted. And in one of the most chilling sequences in the film, in the movie, let me read you, because I'm going to quote. The prosecutor brings in as an expert a witness, a female doctor who performs abortions too, and who, of course, thinks, like most people, that nevertheless what Dr. Gosnell does is absolutely intolerable, meaning going beyond at the time, going beyond the 24 weeks, etc. And at one moment, Dr. Gosnell's lawyer asks this doctor, do you have, I'm reading, okay, do you have experience in abortions and this performing abortions? And this female doctor says, yes, of course. How many abortions have you performed throughout your career? And the doctor answers, more than 30,000. And at a certain moment, Dr. Gosner's lawyer asks her, do you consider it intolerable that a fetus that has come out of the womb alive, that then with a pair of scissors, the doctor cuts off the spinal cord at the base of the neck and kill it, the fetus? And the doctor says, yes, that's inhuman. And the lawyer continues, doctor, have you ever had a child who, after an abortion performed by you, managed to survive? And the doctor says, yes, in several occasions. And the lawyer says, and what did you do then? Well, we placed it in a little blanket so that it would be comfortable, and then left it there, and then he would die. And the lawyer says, and really, do you think it is more humane to let a child who was born alive die in a little blanket than the fact of killing him straight away at the very moment by cutting the spinal cord with scissors? The film caused such a sensation in the United States that actually it was on top. You know how they measure, which film is doing best and so on, and it was at the very top. And it was, when it was at the very top, there is another film now about sexual trafficking, also at the very top, I think. But anyway, the distribution chains stopped distributing the film because it was very difficult for people, they felt, to see the truth, and it was too uncomfortable to see a very civilized doctor, a young woman, beautiful, well dressed, well spoken, perhaps even wearing an expensive perfume, to say in cold blood that yes, of course, he had killed 30,000 babies. So, gender ideology, back to gender ideology. A lot of things are happening now. You are aware of them. I don't know whether I'm going to put this video on Rumble too. I have a I upload them on Rumble, and they're not very no one sees them. I have about 10 people watching them. But just in case YouTube gets upset with me or something, you will be able to continue seeing these things there. Okay. Because this is rather perverse and almost genocidal. Are we talking here about mass extermination? what is certainly here, that's a question mark, but what is certainly here is an attempt to destroy the most natural bond that exists in creation, which is the relationship between a mother and her child. Dr. Vidal continues, he says, allow me to share with you an experience I had in 2016. And again, I'm going to be reading because I'm going to quote him literally. He says, about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a radio program in Spain. I used to listen. I was in Spain for a few years, and I used to listen to his program in the 2000s, and I used to listen to his program. I had a radio program, he says, in Spain, and every year I would go to Israel and do a couple of programs there. I would travel to Israel with my team and change the four-hour radio format, and I would interview the first day people, scholars who had something to do with the traditional historical Israel, would interview archaeologists and so on. And then the second day people who had to do with the Israel of today, politicians and so on. And the last year I did that, he says, was in 2016. And I was going to go, and a friend of mine, he says, from the Israeli embassy in Madrid recommended to me, he says, that a doctor, that I should interview a doctor who was a very pro-life doctor in Israel. And I said, oh, okay, very good. That sounds good to me. The doctor arrived, and he was an Orthodox Jew, very Orthodox. He said he would not, for example, shake hands with the women there, just in case. I think there is a law about menstruation or something like that. Anyway, he was a very Orthodox Jew. He sat down, and I introduced him on the radio, he says, and then after the introduction, I said, now, doctor, I understand you are a pro-life doctor. And he said, no, I'm not. I am pro-choice. And Dr. Vidal says, now, I had been on radio a number of times, and there is always that time when you expect an answer and then there is another one. And for 2 or 3 seconds, you just say, oh my God, okay, what do I do now? Do I start telling jokes? Because it's totally unexpected, and you have prepared yourself to conduct the interview in one way, and now you have to very quickly recover and so on, which he did because he was very experienced. But the doctor said, no, I'm not, I'm pro-choice. So he said, let me see my notes here, I lost. Okay. He says, anyway, I recovered, and I asked him, how come that you are favorable to abortion? And he tells me, look, it is very clear to me that the decision has to be made by the mother. But my medical experience during many decades now show and taught me that if the woman can decide freely and with time think about what she is going to do, her nature as a woman makes her makes her have that child. Of course, if she has the boyfriend saying, abort, we cannot have a child right now because it's in the way of our careers or whatever, or the husband say, abort, we cannot feed another child, or the feminist friend says, abort, you have a right. to your own body making the decision and get rid of that thing, which is not even human anyway. Yes, it is very possible, the doctor said, that in those circumstances the woman will still abort. But in my experience is that if you leave the woman alone with what she is carrying in her womb, that woman can decide freely by herself and think calmly. In my experience over many decades, they always decide to have the child. And Dr. Vidal says when he went back to Madrid, he called his friend and said, okay, told him about this interview and said, what do you make of it? Is he for real? Was telling a story, what? And his friend said, okay, that, hold on, let me find it. The friend said, let me tell you something. Oh, he is for real, okay. He says, a few years ago, the women who had decided to keep the child and not to abort because this doctor had been their doctor and told them to think about it freely without any interference. They decided, all these women, to pay him a tribute. And he was already rather old, getting on in years, and to actually go to have a tribute paid to him and to actually go with the child that they had not aborted and celebrate him and celebrate the child. And Dr. Vidal says, were there many women there? He says, we filled one whole stadium and it was crowded. Probably that man had saved many more lives than that doctor in the room had destroyed. The doctor of the 30,000 abortions. And the difference is that this man thought that human nature, being what it is what it is. And human nature does not want a mother to destroy the life that she is carrying within. She wants that life to come to term and be born. Gender ideology, however, is extremely interested in the fact that it should not be so. Not only is she perhaps murderous in the field of abortion. In Europe, more and more laws are being approved on euthanasia, and it is easy to also manipulate people on this. The population, the argument will be, why are you going to die suffering? That is, we are going to help you to live this world calmly and sweetly. Well, we know that abortion in the 60s, in the late 60s, started with, in the case of rape and incest. That is how it started. Now, it's a nice thing to allow you to stop suffering. No one wants to inflict suffering on anybody, so you will die calmly and sweetly. And if you think about it for half a second and you think of how that can degenerate into other things and other circumstances, that is, I think, easy. Well, about a decade ago, it lasted for many years, he said, this is again, I continue with Dr. Vidal, we discovered in our program a doctor in Spain who had a team in a hospital in Madrid and who killed people according to a point system. People went to the hospital, and if they were over 60 years, it was X points, and if they had a chronic disease or if they were diabetic, they had Y points, and those points would be added up. And if you went beyond that number of points, he sedated them and killed them. And that was for years. And it was discovered. It was obvious after a while. People would arrive, perhaps they were, 70 years old, perhaps they had diabetes. They would come for their monthly checkups, for example, and they left dead. And he says, it was not easy for me to publish this because they were politicians who supported the doctor. And then he goes on to talk about the problems that he had to face because of his house had been, some financial problems or other. I won't bother you with all the details, but he had a very, very difficult time because actually the politicians were not happy with him discussing this issue at all. Left and right, remember, is one ideology coming from the top. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you all this. So I think I'm going to leave it there just to close up the argument. The destruction of the family, if you have an agenda, if you have an ideology that is meant to be imposed from above, the family is the thing that you have to go against. We know the Soviets did it. We know that the Maoists did it. And I think it's, to a large extent, I think we can see how the family has been, for a long time now, and is being attacked. And in order to attack the family, you have many different prongs, as it were. I don't want to go into specifically what is happening now with the mutilation of children, with men impersonating women, and so on and so forth. The point is that you have to see it within this framework, that this is not one thing by itself. It's not about this person having this right to dress as he likes. You have to see it in a much wider context, that it is to change the shape of how the world is being organized and run. The nation states might have been they probably think that the nation states, the world being organized into different nation states, was perhaps a very good idea in the 18th and the 19th century, and a little tiny bit of the 20th century, but now in the 21st it makes no sense, really. So what we are going to have is a world government, is a world dominance, and so everything else has to fall apart. Now you're going to have obstruction, you're going to have disagreements, you're going to have a lot of people that won't agree with it if you tell them openly like that, but there is no need to be so explicit. So what we're going to do is, first of all, to try to attack the pillars of that nation state. That is the nation state itself, how it is organized politically, the family, because that is the last refuge, and culturally to just splatter it into, smithereens. The culture of it, its morals, its culture. Okay, so they're going to inflict this things we're suffering from at the moment, trying to endure the best we can. And that is an attack on the cohesion of the culture of that nation state. Again, thank you very much. If you're still with me, I would ask you please to subscribe so I can have more. It can sort of increase the logarithm or whatever it is, and I would appreciate that. In the next video I will continue with this, but will concentrate on the nation state and on Christianity as a religion to be destroyed. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.